The bell above the door chimed as Thomas Brennan stepped into Elite Defense Solutions, a gun shop that gleamed with chrome fixtures and glass cases filled with the latest tactical equipment. At 82 years old, Thomas moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned long ago that rushing never got you anywhere worth going. His canvas field jacket was faded, worn soft by decades of wear, and his hand bore the calluses and scars of a life lived in service. Behind the counter stood Derek Walsh, the owner, a man in his mid-30s whose entire identity seemed constructed from YouTube gun channels and Instagram influencer pages. His beard was meticulously groomed, his tactical pants had more pockets than any human could possibly need, and his shirt bore the logo of his own store along with patches he'd bought online to look more operator. Thomas approached the counter, his eyes scanning the display of accessories and parts. Derek was in the middle of filming a product review on his phone, posturing for the camera with exaggerated hand gestures. "Hold on," Derek said without looking up, his voice carrying the irritation of someone whose time was clearly too valuable to be interrupted. He finished his take, checked the video, and finally acknowledged Thomas with a barely concealed eye roll. "Yeah, what do you need?" "I'm looking for a firing pin assembly for an M14, Thomas said, his voice steady and unhurried. "Standard military issue, if you stock them." Derek let out a theatrical groan and set his phone down on the counter. "An M14? Dude, seriously?" He turned to a young customer browsing nearby, a man dressed head to toe in expensive tactical gear. "You hearing this? Guy wants parts for a rifle from, what, the 60s? The younger customer snickered on cue. "That platform is obsolete, old man," Derek continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Nobody who knows what they're doing shoots those anymore. Why don't you upgrade to something this century? I can set you up with a modern AR platform, something with all the bells and whistles. Hell, I'll even give you the senior citizen discount." He smirked at his own joke. Thomas didn't react. His expression remained neutral, patient. "I just need the firing pin," he repeated. Derek's smirk faded, replaced by visible annoyance. This wasn't going the way he expected. The old man was supposed to be embarrassed, flustered, maybe even apologetic for wasting his time. Instead, he just stood there, unmoved. "Look around, Gramps," Derek said, sweeping his arm to encompass the store. "This is a premium establishment. We don't carry junk parts for museum pieces. We cater to professionals, people who actually know firearms." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "To be honest, I'm not even sure why you're here. You look like you'd have trouble working the safety on a modern weapon, let alone handling anything with recoil." A small crowd was forming now. Other customers had stopped browsing to watch the exchange. Some held their phones up, recording. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket slowly, retrieving a small notebook where he'd written down the part number. His movements were methodical, unhurried. This seemed to infuriate Derek further. "Are you kidding me right now?" Derek's voice rose. "I don't have time for this. You're holding up actual customers." He pointed toward the door. "I think it's time for you to leave. Maybe try a pawn shop or something. They deal in antiques." Thomas looked up from his notebook, meeting Derek's eyes for a long moment. There was no anger there, no indignation, just a profound weariness, the exhaustion of someone who had seen this particular brand of arrogance too many times before. "I served with that rifle," Thomas said quietly. "I'm just trying to maintain it properly." Derek laughed, harsh and mocking. "Oh, here we go. Let me guess. You're some kind of war hero. What's next? You're going to tell me about storming the beaches." He noticed something then, a small patch on Thomas's jacket, barely visible beneath the collar. It was faded almost to nothing, but Derek could make out what looked like a fouled anchor and eagle. "What's that supposed to be?" Derek asked, pointing. "You buy that at a surplus store?" Trying to look cool. He reached out suddenly, grabbing the edge of Thomas's jacket to get a better look at the patch. The moment his hand touched the worn fabric, Thomas went very still. His eyes, which had been calm and patient, seemed to look through Derek into some distant, terrible place. For just an instant, the fluorescent lights of the gun shop flickered, and in Thomas's mind he was elsewhere. The air was thick with humidity and the stench of napalm. He could hear the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire, the screams of wounded men, the roar of helicopters overhead. He felt the weight of his rifle in his hands, still hot from continuous fire. He saw faces, young faces, boys who never made it home. Then he was back. Derek's hand was still on his jacket. The shop owner's face twisted in contempt. "Get your hands off me," Thomas said softly. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Derek shoved him instead, both hands against the old man's chest, hard enough to send him stumbling backward into a display of cleaning supplies. "I said get out. You're trespassing now. I want you gone before I call the cops and tell them some confused old man is causing problems." Thomas caught himself against the wall, steadied himself, and without another word, turned and walked toward the exit. He moved with the same measured pace he'd entered with, refusing to be hurried by Derek's hostility. As the door closed behind Thomas, Derek turned to his small audience with his arms spread wide. "Can you believe that guy? These old-timers think they can just come in here and waste everyone's time with their fossil guns." He pulled out his phone. "That's definitely going in today's story. When boomers attack." What Derek didn't notice was a young man standing near the back of the store, partially obscured by a tactical vest display. His name was Sergeant Marcus Chen, and he was on a 72-hour pass from Camp Lejeune, where he served with the 2nd Marine Division. He'd come in looking for a replacement weapon light for his personal sidearm. He'd watched the entire encounter with growing disbelief. He'd seen the patch on the old man's jacket, and unlike Derek, he knew exactly what it meant. He'd also noticed the way the old man carried himself, the economy of movement, the way his eyes constantly tracked the room even when he seemed to be focused on one thing. These were habits beaten into someone by combat, not learned from YouTube videos. When Derek shoved Thomas, something cold and hard settled in Chen's chest. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something cleaner, more purposeful. He'd seen enough disrespect in his life, but watching a fellow Marine, an elder Marine, treated like garbage by some civilian playing dress-up was beyond the pale. Chen set down the light he'd been examining and walked toward the counter. He moved past Derek without a word, his face expressionless, and pushed through the front door. Outside, he found Thomas sitting in his truck, an old Ford with a faded Marine Corps license plate holder. The old man was staring straight ahead, his hands resting on the steering wheel, not in defeat but in the posture of someone gathering themselves. Chen approached the driver's side window and tapped gently. Thomas looked over, his face questioning. "So," Chen said, his voice carrying the respect of formal address. "I'm Sergeant Chen, 2nd Marine Division. I saw what happened in there, and I want you to know it was wrong." Thomas nodded slowly. "Appreciate that, son." Chen hesitated, then asked, "Sir, that patch on your jacket, is that 1st Battalion, 9th Marines?" Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. "Walking Dead. Yes, it is. Vietnam, 68 through 69. Chen felt his stomach drop. 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. The Walking Dead. One of the most decorated and most blooded battalions in Marine Corps history. They'd fought through some of the worst battles of the Vietnam War, sustaining casualties that would have broken lesser units. "So," Chen said, "would you mind waiting here for just a few minutes? I need to make a phone call." Thomas studied the young sergeant's face, saw the determination there, and gave a small nod. "I'm not in any rush." Chen stepped away and pulled out his phone. He didn't call his command at Lejeune. The distance was too far. The response would take too long. Instead, he called a number he'd memorized during his time at the School of Infantry, the direct line to the duty officer at Quantico, less than 40 miles up the interstate. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Quantico Duty Office, Staff Sergeant Reeves." "Staff Sergeant, this is Sergeant Chen, 2nd Marines. I'm currently on leave, but I need to report an incident involving a Marine veteran. It requires immediate attention." There was a pause. "Go ahead, Sergeant." Chen laid out the entire encounter in clear, concise terms. He described Derek, the store, the disrespect, and the physical assault. Then he delivered the crucial information. "Staff Sergeant, the Marine who was assaulted is a Vietnam veteran. 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. Is in his 80s. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Staff Sergeant Reeves spoke again, his voice had changed entirely. "Did you get his name, Sergeant?" "Not yet, Staff Sergeant. But I can. Get it. Text it to this number. And Sergeant Chen, do not let that Marine leave. I don't care what you have to do. Stay with him." The line went dead. Chen walked back to Thomas's truck. "So, I know this might seem strange, but would you mind giving me your name and maybe showing me your ID? It's important." Thomas regarded him for a moment, then reached for his wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and a worn military ID card, handing both to Chen. Chen looked at the military ID. Thomas James Brennan, Sergeant Major, USMC, Ret. The issue date was from 1971. His hand started to shake slightly as he took a photo of the ID with his phone and sent it to Staff Sergeant Reeves with a simple message: "This is him." The response came back within 30 seconds. "Stay there. Help is en route." At Marine Corps Base Quantico, Staff Sergeant Reeves burst into the office of his commanding officer without knocking, something he would never do under normal circumstances. "Sir," he barked, "we have a situation." Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison looked up from his paperwork, his expression darkening at the breach of protocol. But before he could speak, Reeves continued. "A Marine veteran was just physically assaulted at a civilian gun shop. The veteran is Sergeant Major Thomas Brennan, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, Vietnam." Harrison's face went pale. He didn't need to look up the name. Every Marine officer worth his salt knew the legends, the names that appeared in the histories and lesson plans at officer candidate school. "Where?" Harrison demanded, already standing. "Elite Defense Solutions, off Route 1. Sir, we have a Marine on scene with him now." Harrison grabbed his cover off the desk. "Get Colonel Westfield on the phone. Tell him I need him to authorize a show of force. Full ceremonial detail. And get me the Provost Marshal. If this civilian put his hands on a sergeant major, he's going to learn what consequences look like." "Already on it, sir," Reeves said. Within 15 minutes, a convoy was assembled. 2 official sedans, 3 Hums, and a transport carrying 12 Marines from the Ceremonial Guard, all in their dress blue uniforms. They rolled out of Quantico's gates with the kind of precision that comes from decades of institutional muscle memory. Back at Elite Defense Solutions, Derek was riding high. He'd posted clips of the encounter to his social media, framing himself as the reasonable business owner dealing with a difficult customer. His followers were eating it up, leaving comments about entitled boomers and the need to defend your business. He was in the middle of responding to comments when one of his customers, a man in his 50s, walked up to the counter with a strange expression on his face. "Hey, Derek," the man said slowly. "You might want to come look at this." Derek followed him to the front window. His blood ran cold. Rolling into the parking lot was a military convoy. Not police cars. Not security guards. United States Marines. The vehicles formed a perfect semicircle around the storefront, blocking both exits from the small shopping center. The doors opened in synchronized precision. Marines in immaculate dress blues emerged, forming 2 lines with the kind of discipline that made civilians stop and stare. From a lead sedan stepped Lieutenant Colonel Harrison. His uniform was crisp, his bearing was commanding, and the expression on his face could have frozen nitrogen. But he wasn't looking at the store. He was walking directly toward Thomas Brennan's truck. The old sergeant major had stepped out when he saw the convoy approaching, and now he stood at attention, decades of training overriding his age. Sergeant Chen stood beside him, equally rigid. Harrison came to a stop 3 paces away and rendered the sharpest salute of his career. "Sergeant Major Brennan, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, 1st Marine Regiment." "Sir, it is an honor." Thomas returned the salute, his arm steady despite his years. "Colonel." Harrison held the salute a moment longer, then dropped it and turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers who had poured out of nearby stores, phones already recording. For those who don't know, Harrison's voice carried across the parking lot with parade ground authority. "This is Sergeant Major Thomas Brennan. He served with 1st Battalion, 9th Marines during the Vietnam War. The Walking Dead fought in some of the most brutal engagements of that conflict. Sergeant Major Brennan participated in Operation Dewey Canyon, the Battle of Khe Sanh, and numerous other operations where Marines faced overwhelming odds and prevailed through sheer courage and determination. He paused, letting the words sink in. He owned 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with V device for valor, and a Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. He led men under fire. He brought them home when others would have given up. He represents the absolute finest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. Behind him, the honor guard presented arms in perfect unison, the sound of a movement like a single rifle shot. Derek had emerged from his store, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and dawning horror as he began to understand exactly who he'd just humiliated. Harrison turned his attention to the store owner. The warmth in his voice evaporated instantly, replaced by ice. "You run this establishment?" Harrison asked, though it wasn't really a question. Derek managed a weak nod. "Then you need to understand something," Harrison said, his voice low but carrying the weight of institutional fury. "What you did today wasn't just disrespectful. It was an assault on everything the Marine Corps stands for. You put your hands on a decorated veteran, a man who earned his respect in blood and fire while you were playing tactical dress-up." He took a step closer to Derek, who seemed to shrink into himself. "Effective immediately, Elite Defense Solutions is blacklisted. No active duty Marine from any base within 100 miles will be permitted to conduct business here. I will personally ensure that every veterans organization, every military family support group, and every online community knows exactly what kind of establishment you run." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Thomas stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the colonel's shoulder. "Colonel, I think he understands." Harrison looked at the old sergeant major, saw the quiet dignity in his eyes, and gave a sharp nod. "Yes, sir." Thomas turned to face Derek directly. The crowd fell silent. "I didn't come here looking for trouble," Thomas said quietly. "I came looking for a part for a rifle I carried in service to my country. That rifle kept me alive when I was 19 years old and scared out of my mind in a jungle on the other side of the world. It's not obsolete to me. It's a connection to the men I served with, many of whom never came home." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "You judged me based on my age, on my clothes, on a rifle you deemed too old to matter. But here's what you missed. Respect isn't earned by having the latest gear or the most followers online. It's earned through how you treat people, especially those who came before you and made sacrifices you can't begin to imagine." Derek's face had gone from pale to red, tears of shame forming in his eyes. "I hope you learn from this," Thomas said. "Not for my sake, but for yours." The video footage from that day went viral within hours. Elite Defense Solutions' social media account were deactivated by the end of the day, but not before thousands of one-star reviews flooded in. Derek's earlier posts mocking Thomas were screenshot and shared across every military forum and veterans group on the internet. His business collapsed within weeks. The military blacklist was official and absolute. Veterans who made up 70% of his customer base abandoned him overnight. Without the military community's support, his premium, high-margin business model was unsustainable. 6 months later, the building that once housed Elite Defense Solutions sat empty, a for-lease sign in the window. And 8 months after that, Derek Walsh found himself working the night shift at a distribution center, loading trucks in the pre-dawn darkness. It was honest work, hard work, the kind that left him exhausted at the end of every shift. One night, he was stocking supplies in the warehouse when he saw a familiar figure walking through the facility. Thomas Brennan was there with his grandson, who worked in the facilities management office. They were laughing about something. The old man's face creased with genuine joy. Derek froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to hide behind a pallet of boxes, to disappear into the shadows of the warehouse. But there was nowhere to go. Thomas noticed him. Their eyes met across the concrete floor. Derek braced himself for mockery, for the old man to call out to everyone within earshot about what had happened, to humiliate him the way he'd been humiliated. Instead, Thomas simply nodded. It was a small gesture, neither warm nor cold. Just an acknowledgement. One human being recognizing another. Then he continued on, talking with his grandson about weekend plans and fishing trips. Derek stood there in the harsh warehouse lights, a box of inventory in his hands, finally understanding the lesson he'd been too arrogant to learn before. True strength doesn't need to prove itself, and real respect is given freely, not demanded. The story of Sergeant Major Brennan reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unassuming. They don't demand our attention or respect, but they've earned it nonetheless. If you believe in honoring those who served, like this video, subscribe to True Valor Veteran, and share this story. Join us next time as we continue to share tales of courage, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity of those who wore the uniform.